364 days ago. I found my $1,200 ergonomic chair rotting in the November rain while my brother screamed about crypto in the office that had fed our family for 5 years. My mother told me to take the kitchen table because he needed creative space. They thought they had claimed a room, but they had actually severed their only lifeline. Today, exactly 1 year later, they are at my door, not demanding, but begging. My name is Hadley Rosewood, and in the high-stakes world of corporate data recovery, I am the person you call when your redundant backups fail and your shareholders are panic selling. I am a senior data restoration specialist at Viridian Dynamics. My job requires surgical precision, absolute focus, and a digital environment so stable it might as well be a laboratory. For the last 5 years, that laboratory was the second bedroom of my parents' house. I had transformed that 150-square-foot space into a sanctuary of silence and processing power. I had spent $8,000 of my own bonuses soundproofing the walls with acoustic foam, installing a dedicated fiber optic line, and building a custom server rack with a cooling system that hummed quieter than a sleeping cat. It was not just a room, it was the engine that kept the lights on, the refrigerator stocked, and the mortgage paid in this house. I had been gone for exactly 3 days. It was a mandatory on-site crisis in Chicago. Recovering a corrupted RAID array for a logistics firm that was losing $2 million an hour, I came home exhausted, my skin feeling like paper and my eyes burning from 72 hours of staring at hex code. All I wanted was to step into my office, check my own server status, and decompress in the silence of my ergonomic chair. I reached for the door handle. My key slid in, but it hit a wall of metal halfway through. I frowned, pulling it back and trying again. It refused to turn. I looked closer at the hardware. The brushed nickel handle I had installed was gone, replaced by a cheap, shiny brass knob that looked like it had been bought from a discount bin at a hardware store. Before I could process the absurdity of a lock being changed in my own house without my permission, the door swung open from the inside. A wave of stale air hit me. The cloying scent of blue raspberry vape smoke mixed with unwashed laundry. And there, sitting in the center of the room, was my younger brother, Preston. At 25 years old, Preston was a man in body but a teenager in spirit, a perpetual dreamer who moved from one get-rich-quick scheme to another with the confidence of a CEO and the bank account of a toddler. He was not sitting in my chair. He was bouncing on a yoga ball, screaming into a headset. "We are going to the moon, boys, to the absolute moon. Smash that like button if you want to see the portfolio double by midnight," he yelled, his voice cracking. I stepped inside, my suitcase dropping from my hand. The room was unrecognizable. My carefully calibrated dual-monitor setup had been shoved aggressively to the side, dangerously close to the edge of the desk, to make room for 3 cheap, curved screens displaying fluctuating graphs of obscure cryptocurrencies. My soothing, neutral gray walls were now plastered with adhesive LED strips that flashed a seizure-inducing strobe of neon purple and green. The acoustic foam I had painstakingly glued up was peeling in corners where he had seemingly tried to tape up posters of bored-looking cartoon monkeys. "What is this?" My voice was low, barely a whisper, but it cut through the noise enough for Preston to slide one ear cup off. "Yo, had's your back early," he said, not standing up. "Keep it down. Yeah, I am alive. Big audience tonight. We are talking serious alpha." "Where is my chair?" I asked, staring at the empty space where my Herman Miller usually sat. "Oh, that thing." He waved a dismissive hand. "It didn't fit the vibe. Plus, the mesh was uncomfortable. Mom said to put it on the balcony." On the balcony? In November, before I could strangle him, my parents, Gerald and Linda, appeared in the hallway. They looked flustered, not because they had violated my privacy, but because I was interrupting. "Hadley, honey, please," my mother said, rushing forward to usher me out of the room. "Preston is working. He is in a very sensitive phase of his startup." "Startup," I repeated, looking from her to the disaster zone that was my office. He is gambling on meme coins in the room where I earn the money that pays for the electricity he is burning. Don't be dramatic, my father grunted, crossing his arms. The boy needs space. He has been saying for months that he can't focus in the basement because it is too dark. This room gets the best light. We decided as a family that it was time for a change. I looked at them. I paid 2/3 of the mortgage on this house. I paid for the renovation of this room. I paid for the internet bill that he is currently using to stream. Family is family. Hadley, my mother said, her tone taking on that familiar, guilt-tripping edge. You are never home anyway. You are always traveling or working late. Preston is here. He is trying to build something. We need to support him. And where exactly am I supposed to work? I asked, feeling a cold numbness spreading through my chest. My mother smiled, a tight, benevolent smile that made my stomach turn. She pointed down the hallway toward the kitchen. The kitchen table is huge, honey, and it is right next to the coffee maker. It is perfect for you. You just sit on your laptop and type, right? You can do that anywhere. I looked at the kitchen. The table was covered in a sticky film of grease from breakfast. The dishwasher was running, emitting a loud, rhythmic thumping sound. The television in the living room was blasting a game show at volume 50. You want me to secure sensitive corporate data, I said slowly, next to the grease trap, while Dad watches Jeopardy. You are so rigid, my father sighed, shaking his head. It is just temporary until Preston makes his first million. Then he will buy his own place. You need to be more flexible. They looked at me with such genuine confusion. In their eyes, what I did was invisible. I stared at a screen. I typed, and money appeared. It required no infrastructure, no concentration, no respect. Preston, however, was loud. He had lights. He had fans. To them, that was what a career looked like. I turned back to the room to grab my laptop bag, and that was when I saw it. My breath hitched. In the corner, under the desk, sat my private server tower. It contained 4 terabytes of archived data, client history, and proprietary recovery algorithms I had been developing for 3 years. It was the brain of my operation. It was dark. The power light was off. The plug lay on the floor, kicked aside. Plugged into the surge protector slot where my server, my livelihood used to be, was a small, white mini-fridge buzzing loudly. You unplugged it, I said. The rage was gone, replaced by a sudden, crystalline clarity. I needed a place for the energy drinks. Hads, Preston said, looking at his chat monitor. Relax. Computers turn back on. It is not a big deal. He had performed a hard shutdown on a running server to keep his Red Bull cold. He had risked corrupting years of work for a fizzy drink. I looked at my parents. They were waiting for me to explode. They were waiting for the shouting match so they could call me hysterical, tell me I was jealous of Preston's potential, and then demand I apologize. That was the script we had followed for 29 years. I looked at the cheap brass lock. I looked at the kitchen table. I looked at the mini-fridge. I did not scream. I did not demand they move his things out. I simply nodded. Okay, I said. My mother let out a breath she had been holding. See, I knew you would understand. You are a good sister. Hadley. I am going to take a shower, I said softly. I walked past them, into my bedroom, and closed the door. They thought I had capitulated. They thought the silence was submission. They did not understand that when a system administrator finds a network that is hopelessly compromised, we do not try to patch it anymore. We format the drive. We disconnect. I sat on the edge of my bed and looked at my phone. It was 7 o'clock on a Tuesday. I did not unpack my suitcase. Instead, I opened my banking app. I looked at the recurring transfer scheduled for the first of the month, the mortgage payment, the utility allowance, the grocery fund. I canceled it. They wanted the room. They could have the room, but they had forgotten that the room was part of a structure, and I was the foundation. I was not going to fight them for square footage. I was going to remove the foundation and watch the house fall. For the next 72 hours, I became a ghost in plain sight. to my parents and Preston. I was the defeated daughter, meekly typing away at the sticky kitchen table, occasionally wiping maple syrup off my elbows. I wore my noise-canceling headphones not to listen to music, but to silence the inane chatter of the television and my mother's constant telephone gossip. They saw submission. I was executing a strategic extraction protocol, while my mother loudly discussed her neighbor's hip replacement on the phone 3 feet away from me. I was not analyzing data for Viridian Dynamics. I was on a secure browser, scrolling through luxury listings in the Iron District. For years, I had driven past those converted industrial lofts, towering structures of red brick and steel with floor-to-ceiling windows, and told myself they were too frivolous. I told myself that the $3,000 a month in rent was better spent paying down my parents' second mortgage or funding Preston's tuition for the graphic design course he quit after 2 weeks. But now, I ran the numbers. Without the Rosewood family tax, the groceries, the utilities, the debts, the endless handouts, my disposable income didn't just double, it tripled. I contacted a high-end leasing agent named Marcus. I told him I needed immediate occupancy. He sent me a listing for a corner unit 2,000 square feet, polished concrete floors, and most importantly, a bedroom with a heavy, solid oak door that locked. I went to see it during my lunch break. Walking into that empty space felt like inhaling pure oxygen after holding my breath for 5 years. The air smelled of cedar and rain, not stale vape smoke. I signed the electronic lease standing in the center of the living room. When Marcus handed me the heavy magnetic keycard, my hand trembled. It was not fear. It was the adrenaline of a prisoner realizing the cell door had been unlocked the entire time. Step 2 was the financial autopsy. That night, huddled under my duvet with the brightness on my laptop turned down to 5%. I logged into the supplementary credit card account I had given my parents for emergencies only. I scrolled through the statement. The rage I expected did not come. Instead, a cold, clinical detachment took over. There were no medical emergencies listed. There were no urgent home repairs. On October 24th, just 2 days before I came home to find my office gone, there was a charge for $850 at a boutique audio store, a professional-grade streaming microphone. On October 26th, a charge for $400 at a lighting supply store. They had not just kicked me out of my office. They had used my own money to buy the equipment to replace me. They had financed my own eviction. I stared at the glowing screen. I did not dispute the charges. Not yet. I downloaded the statements, saved them to a thumb drive, and encrypted the file. This was ammunition, and you do not fire your weapon until you have a clear shot at the target. The physical extraction began on Wednesday. I could not simply pack boxes. That would trigger an interrogation. I had to bleed the room dry, one item at a time. Each morning, I left the house carrying a large tote bag. "Just dropping off dry cleaning," I would call out to my mother. The bag was filled with my favorite books, my expensive mechanical keyboards, and my small electronics. I drove them to the new apartment, dropped them off, and went to work. Each evening, I returned with the bag empty, claiming I had left the clothes at the cleaners. "You spend so much on clothes," my mother tutted, watching me hang my coat. "You really should learn to hand wash. It saves water." "I will keep that in mind," I said, my voice perfectly level. By Friday, my bedroom shelves were noticeably bare, but my family was too self-absorbed to notice. They were distracted by a new crisis. "Hadley!" Preston screamed from upstairs. It was the frantic shriek of a child who had dropped his ice cream. "The internet is broken. I am lagging. I am losing viewers." I sat at the kitchen table, calmly sipping a cup of black coffee. My laptop was open. I had logged into the router's administrator panel 10 minutes prior. I had not cut him off, that would be too obvious. Instead, I navigated to the quality of service settings. I had prioritized my own MAC address to receive 95% of the bandwidth. I throttled the remaining devices, the smart TV, Preston's gaming rig, my mother's iPad to a crawl, a dial-up speed torture of 5 megabits per second. My father stomped into the kitchen, his face red. "Did you do something with the Wi-Fi?" The TV keeps buffering. I'm trying to watch the game. I am working, Dad, I said, pointing to my screen which showed a complex data visualization. I am uploading a terabyte of recovery data to the cloud. It takes a lot of bandwidth. Work comes first. Remember, I threw their own logic back at them. Preston needs space to work. I need bandwidth to work. Well, stop it, my father snapped. Preston is freaking out. I can't stop a client transfer, I lied smoothly. It will be done in 48 hours. 48 hours. Preston appeared at the top of the stairs, looking pale. I have a stream scheduled tonight. You are sabotaging me. Go to a coffee shop, I suggested, not looking up. I can't stream from Starbucks, he yelled. My father sighed, rubbing his temples. He looked at me, and for a second, I saw the request forming on his lips. He wanted me to stop working so his son could play. But something in my eyes, some flinty hardness he hadn't seen before, made him hesitate. He pivoted. Fine, whatever. Listen, Hadley, while you are sitting there, the roof over the garage is looking bad. I saw a wet spot on the ceiling. I got a quote. It is going to be about $6,000 to fix. He let the number hang in the air. He didn't ask me for the money. He just stated the amount, waiting for me to instinctively reach for my checkbook as I had done for the boiler, the car repairs, and the dental bills. That sounds expensive, I said, typing a sentence that meant absolutely nothing. It is, he pressed. We don't have that kind of liquidity right now. With the holidays coming up, I am sure you will figure it out, I said. You always say you are the man of the house. The silence that followed was deafening. My father blinked. He wasn't used to resistance. He was used to an ATM that breathed. Before he could argue, I put my headphones back on, signaling the conversation was over. Saturday night was the end. I had moved 90% of my belongings. The apartment in the Iron District was ready. My bed was assembled. My real server was installed in its new home. I waited until 2 a.m. The house was silent, save for the rhythmic snoring of my father from the master bedroom. I crept downstairs to the utility closet. This was the nerve center of the house. Over the years, I have installed a comprehensive smart home system to make their lives easier. Automated thermostats, smart locks, voice-controlled lighting, security cameras, even a smart fridge that ordered milk when it ran low. I was the administrator for all of it. I pulled out my phone and opened the Central Control app. I selected the Rosewood Residence profile. I scrolled down to the bottom of the settings menu. There was a red button labeled Factory Reset. I did not hesitate. I pressed it. A confirmation box popped up. This will erase all user data, schedules, and saved preferences. All devices will require manual repairing. Are you sure? I tapped yes. Around me. The house gave a digital sigh. The soft blue hum of the thermostat vanished. The smart lights in the hallway flickered once and reset to a harsh, default bright white before turning off. The electronic locks on the front door disengaged their auto-lock schedules. The fridge forgot it needed milk. I had just lobotomized the house. When they woke up, they would be living in a dumb home, and they did not know the first thing about how to operate it manually. They didn't even know where the light switches were for the exterior floodlights, because I had automated them 5 years ago. I picked up my last bag, my laptop, and the hard drive containing the financial records. I walked to the front door. I unlocked it manually. I stepped out into the cool night air. I did not look back at the dark window where my office used to be. I got into my car, started the engine, and drove toward the lights of the Iron District. I was not running away. I was simply evicting myself from a bad investment. Sunday morning arrived with the heavy, sour atmosphere of a hangover. The house was silent. But it was not the peaceful silence of a library. It was the exhausted silence of a frat house after a rager. Preston had hosted what he called a pre-IPO launch party the night before to celebrate his crypto channel hitting 500 subscribers. The living room was littered with empty red plastic cups, half-eaten pizza crusts, and deflated balloons. My parents and Preston were all upstairs, dead to the world, sleeping off the cheap champagne and the delusion of success. I had been awake since 5. I was dressed not in pajamas, but in jeans and a black turtleneck, my hair tied back in a tight, practical ponytail. I stood by the front door, watching the street. At exactly 7 o'clock, a large, unmarked white truck pulled up to the curb. There was no screech of brakes, no slamming of doors. The crew from Titan. Moving a service I had paid a premium for specifically because they advertised discretion and speed stepped out. I held a finger to my lips as I opened the door. The foreman, a massive man with a clipboard, nodded once. They knew the drill. This was an extraction, not a social call. For the next 60 minutes, my life was dismantled with terrifying efficiency. They bypassed the mess in the living room like soldiers navigating a minefield. They entered the guest room, my temporary sleeping quarters, and stripped the bed, wrapped the mattress, and boxed my remaining clothes. They moved like ghosts. They wore soft-soled shoes and communicated with hand signals. There was no pivot shouting, no banging against door frames. I stood in the hallway, acting as a silent sentry, watching the stairs. Every creak of the floorboards above made my heart hammer against my ribs. But nobody stirred. The Rosewood family was too deep in their slumber of entitlement to notice the foundation of their comfort was walking out the door. By 8 o'clock, the truck was loaded. My existence in that house had been reduced to zero. There was not a single sock, not a stray charger, not a forgotten hair tie left behind. I walked into the kitchen for the final act. The morning light was hitting the table, the same sticky, crumb-laden table they had told me was perfect for my career. I placed 2 items on the center of the placemat where my father usually sat to drink his morning coffee. The first was my secondary platinum credit card, the one my mother carried in her purse, the one they had used to buy Preston's microphone. I had taken a pair of heavy-duty kitchen shears and cut it precisely in half, right through the magnetic strip. The 2 pieces of plastic lay there like a broken promise. The second was a small, yellow sticky note. On it, I had written a single line in clear block letters, new Wi-Fi password, Independence, day 776. It was a cruelty I allowed myself. When they woke up and found the internet dead, they would try this password a dozen times. They would type it into their phones, their tablets, and Preston's streaming PC. They would scream at the router. They would not realize that the password was useless because there was no network to connect to. I had canceled the service effective at midnight the previous night. The signal they were seeing was just the ghost of the router before it fully reset. I walked out the front door and closed it. I did not slam it. I clicked it shut with a soft, final latch. Sitting in the driver's seat of my car, I placed my hands on the steering wheel. I expected tears. I expected a wave of nostalgia or guilt. I waited for the pang of leaving the home where I had grown up. But there was nothing. My chest felt hollow, but it was the hollow of a clean, empty room waiting to be furnished. Not the hollow of loss. It was the feeling of taking off a backpack filled with rocks that you have been carrying for 2 decades. I pulled my phone out of my pocket. I opened my messaging apps: iMessage, WhatsApp, Telegram. I went down the list: Dad, Mom, Preston. I selected block contact for each one. Then, I went to my phone settings. I did not block their calls entirely. I am not a monster. And if one of them was dying, I suppose I would need to know, but I set their ringtones to silent and disabled all notifications. Their calls would go straight to voicemail. Burying their voices in a digital graveyard I could visit on my own terms. I put the car in drive and pulled away from the curb. As I turned the corner, I saw the curtains in the master bedroom twitch. They were still asleep. They were safe in their ignorance for perhaps another hour. I was halfway to the Iron District when the first notification popped up on my dashboard screen. It was a missed call from Mom. It was 9:30. They were awake. I did not answer. 10 minutes later, another call. Then a text message that my phone filtered into a junk folder. But I saw the preview on the car display before it vanished. Hadley. Where are you? The coffee machine isn't working and there is no milk. Why didn't the fridge order it? I let out a short, dry laugh. It wasn't, where did you go? Or, are you okay? It was a complaint about the logistics of their breakfast. They had woken up to a silent house, a missing daughter, and a cut credit card. Their primary concern was that the appliance I had programmed was no longer serving them. The factory reset I had performed the night before had done its job. The smart fridge was now just a cold metal box. If they wanted milk, they would have to go to the store and buy it with their own money. I turned onto the highway, merging into the fast lane. The city skyline rose ahead of me, gray and steel and beautiful. When I arrived at the loft, the movers were already unloading. The space was cavernous, 12-foot ceilings, exposed brick, massive industrial windows that looked out over the river. It was cold, but it was my cold. I directed the movers to the corner I had chosen for my office. It was the furthest point from the door. "Put the desk right there," I instructed, pointing to a spot bathed in natural northern light. "And the chair," my Herman Miller chair, the one I had rescued from the balcony, dried out, and chemically cleaned, was rolled into place. I sat down. It groaned familiarly under my weight. I spun around once, twice. I began to set up. I unpacked my monitors, mounting them on the hydraulic arms with the precision of a surgeon. I connected my server, the hum of the fans spinning up sounding like a choir to my ears. I laid out my mechanical keyboard, the keys clicking with a satisfying, tactile feedback. For the first time in 5 years, I was not wearing noise-canceling headphones. I didn't need them. The only sound in the apartment was the low rumble of the city outside and the beating of my own heart. I was alone. I was insolvent in terms of family. But for the first time in my life, I was rich in peace. I looked at my phone, 5 missed calls, 3 voicemails. I turned the phone face down on the desk. I opened a new project file on my computer. The cursor blinked on the blank white screen, waiting for my command. "Hello, world," I whispered. I began to type. It took exactly 7 days for the Rosewood family ecosystem to experience total environmental collapse. I did not need to install hidden cameras to witness the destruction. I knew the infrastructure of that house better than the people living in it, and I could track the disintegration of their comfort through the increasingly frantic timestamps of their missed calls and the aggressive capitalization of their text messages. It was a domino effect of incompetence, triggered by the removal of the one person who knew how to keep the lights on. The first domino fell on Tuesday morning at 10 o'clock sharp. This was the moment the internet service provider executed the transfer order I had submitted. In my new loft in the Iron District, my fiber optic connection hummed to life, blazing fast and stable. At the house, the connection was severed instantly. I can vividly imagine the scene because Preston sent me a voicemail 3 minutes later that was mostly just incoherent screaming. He had apparently been in the middle of a landmark live stream where he was promising his 12 viewers that a certain obscure coin was going to skyrocket. He had been mid-sentence, probably shouting about diamond hands, when his screen froze. He could not switch to mobile data because the family plan did not support tethering, another cost-saving measure I had implemented years ago that they never noticed until now. He was cut off from his digital lifeline. He was a captain whose ship had suddenly vanished beneath his feet. The text messages that followed were a study in unhinged narcissism. "You ruined my career," he texted. "I was about to go viral. Fix this now, or I will sue you." I deleted the thread without replying. The second domino fell on Wednesday evening. This was the death of entertainment. For 5 years, my parents' evenings were ritualistic. My father would watch old war movies on Amazon Prime, and my mother would binge-watch British period dramas on Netflix. They assumed these libraries of content were just features of the television, like volume or brightness. They did not understand that they were subscription services billed to my personal American Express card. When I changed my billing address and removed the devices from my account, the screens in the living room went black. My mother's text arrived at 8:30 in the evening. "The TV is broken. It is asking for a password and a credit card number. What is the password?" They were sitting in their living room, staring at login screens, realizing that the infinite stream of entertainment they took for granted was actually a luxury good they had to pay for. They tried to switch to cable, but I had canceled the premium package months ago, leaving only the basic local channels. I imagined them flipping through static and infomercials, confused and angry, forced to actually talk to each other. Thursday brought the physical reality check. The mail arrived. For years, I had intercepted the utility bills. I set up autopay, filed the paper copies in my office, and simply paid them. My parents had no concept of what it cost to heat a 3,000-square-foot house with poor insulation, or how much water 3 adults consumed when 2 of them took 40-minute showers. Because I had canceled the autopay and removed my email from the notification list, the utility companies sent the physical bills to the service address. My father called me 6 times in a row between 5 and 6 in the evening. When I didn't answer, he left a voicemail that sounded like he was choking. "Hadley, there must be a mistake," his voice quavered, mixing anger with genuine fear. "We got an electric bill for $450, and the water bill is $200. That is impossible. You need to call them and tell them their meter is broken." It wasn't broken. That was just the cost of leaving the lights on in every room, running the dishwasher for 3 plates, and keeping the thermostat at 75 degrees in November. They were looking at a monthly overhead of nearly $1,000 just to keep the house functioning, and for the first time, they realized that money had to come from their own retirement savings. They tried to summon me. The tone of their messages shifted from confusion to the old, familiar arrogance. They reverted to the strategy that had worked since I was a child, the command. "Come home this weekend." My mother texted, "We need to sort out this administrative mess you left behind. It is irresponsible. Dad is very stressed." They truly believed I was just on a temper tantrum. They thought I was sulking in a hotel, and that a stern word would bring me back to fix the Wi-Fi and pay the electric company. I decided to break my silence, but not with a conversation. I drafted a single email. I wrote it in the cold, impersonal syntax of a legal notice. Subject notice of relocation and liability transfer. To whom it may concern. Effective immediately. I have permanently relocated from the residence. I am no longer a resident, tenant, or administrator of the property. All utility accounts, internet services, and subscription services previously under my name have been terminated or transferred to my new address. Please make arrangements to establish your own accounts for electricity, water, gas, and internet. I am not responsible for any service interruptions or outstanding balances incurred after my departure date. Regards, Hadley Rosewood. I set an auto-reply on my personal email to trigger whenever they messaged me, sending that same text back to them repeatedly. It was a digital wall, by Friday. The culinary degradation had set in. I knew this because I received a notification from my bank which I had forgotten to turn off, alerting me that a transaction was declined. My mother had tried to use the supplementary card I had cut in half to buy groceries at Whole Foods. She had likely stood at the checkout line with a cart full of organic salmon, truffle oil, and imported cheese, only to have the card rejected. The humiliation must have been searing. That night, according to the neighborhood gossip Mrs. Higgins, who lived next door and messaged me on Facebook, a pizza delivery car pulled up to the driveway, then another one on Saturday. The era of home-cooked, healthy meals funded by my salary was over. They were eating sodium and carbohydrates because it was cheap and required no effort. The atmosphere in the house, I imagined, was toxic. Preston, deprived of his audience and his gaming addiction, would be pacing the hallways like a caged animal. My father, staring at the pile of bills, would be doing frantic mental math and realizing the numbers didn't add up. My mother, forced to cook and clean without her smart appliances and her high-budget ingredients, would be feeling the crush of domestic labor she thought she had escaped. And of course, they blamed me. They didn't see their own helplessness. They saw sabotage. In their twisted narrative, I wasn't a person who had left. I was a servant who had stolen the keys. The explosion happened on Sunday night. Preston sent me a final text, one that was different from the others. It wasn't just angry. It was vindictive. "You think you are smart, hiding away. You are destroying this family. Mom is crying. Dad is talking about selling the boat. This is all your fault. You owe us. We are coming to see you." I stared at the screen. They didn't know where I lived. I had been careful. The lease was private. The movers were discreet. Then I realized what he meant. He didn't know where I slept, but he knew where I worked. He was going to bring the circus to Viridian Dynamics. He was going to weaponize their pathetic state to shame me into submission. He thought that if he made a scene in the polished marble lobby of my corporate headquarters, I would be so terrified of losing my professional reputation that I would cut a check right there on the spot. It was a primitive, desperate strategy. It was the move of a bully who had lost his playground. I sat in my ergonomic chair, looking out at the city lights of the Iron District. I took a sip of expensive red wine, a bottle I had bought just for myself. "Come on then," I whispered to the empty room. I wasn't afraid. In fact, I picked up my phone and opened the contact for the head of security at Viridian Dynamics. I had a file to send him. If they wanted a war, I would give them a masterclass in corporate defense. They were bringing emotional blackmail to a gunfight, and I was holding the nuclear codes. Tuesday morning at Viridian Dynamics usually began with a hallowed silence. The lobby of our headquarters was a cathedral of glass and polished steel, designed to intimidate competitors and reassure investors. It was a place where people spoke in hushed tones, where suits were tailored, and where the air smelled of expensive espresso and ambition. I was on the 20th floor, deep in a forensic analysis of a corrupted hard drive, when my desk phone blinked with a priority notification from the front desk. I picked up the receiver. It was Sarah, the head receptionist. Her voice, usually unflappable, was tight. "Ms. Rosewood," she said. "I apologize for the interruption. There are 3 individuals in the lobby causing a disturbance. They claim to be your family. They are demanding that you come down immediately." I closed my eyes for a brief second. I had anticipated this, but hearing it confirmed gave me a sickening feeling of validation. They had actually done it. They had brought their dysfunction to my place of business, thinking they could weaponize my shame. "Do not let them up, Sarah," I said, my voice steady. "I am looking at the security feed now." I pulled up the lobby camera on my secondary monitor. The image was high definition, sharp enough to see the lint on my father's jacket. They looked out of place, like refugees from a chaotic reality show stumbling into a board meeting. My father was wearing his golf windbreaker, which was stained. My mother looked frantic, her hair unstyled, and Preston was wearing sweatpants and a hoodie that said "Crypto King" across the chest. They were arguing with the security guards. I saw Preston gesturing wildly, pointing at the elevators. I saw my mother crying, using that weaponized vulnerability she had perfected over decades. My father was red-faced, shouting something that was causing the executives walking by to stop and stare. "They are saying they won't leave until you come down," Sarah whispered. "Your father is yelling that you are an ungrateful daughter who abandoned them. They think I will come down to shut them up," I said. "They think I will pay them to save face." "What should we do?" Sarah asked. "Should I call the police?" "No," I said. "Connect me to Mr. Henderson in security. And Sarah, tell him to initiate Protocol Bravo." I had prepared for this moment the day I moved out. I had met with Mr. Henderson, the chief of security, and provided him with their photos. I had explained that I had a volatile family situation and that under no circumstances were they allowed past the turnstiles. I had also given him a sealed manila envelope. I watched the screen. Mr. Henderson, a man built like a tank in a bespoke suit, stepped out from behind the security desk. He approached my family. He did not look angry. He looked bored. That was the Viridian way. We did not get emotional. We managed risk. My father tried to step into Mr. Henderson's space. Mr. Henderson did not flinch. He simply held up a hand, palm out. The audio on the feed was muted, but I knew exactly what was being said. "You are trespassing. You need to leave." My mother grabbed Preston's arm. She was looking around the lobby, likely realizing for the first time how small and shabby they looked against the backdrop of corporate power. Then, I saw Mr. Henderson reach into his jacket pocket. He pulled out the thick, cream-colored envelope I had prepared. He said something to my father and extended the envelope. My father hesitated, then snatched it. He probably thought it was a check. He probably thought I had caved, that I had sent down $5,000 to make them go away. I zoomed in on the camera feed. My father tore open the seal. He pulled out the document inside. It was not a check. It was a 10-page Excel spreadsheet, printed on heavy bond paper, stapled at the corner, the title page, printed in bold, size 24 font, read "The Debt." I had spent 3 nights compiling it. It was a forensic accounting of my life for the past 5 years. Every entry was dated and categorized. August 3rd, 2020 mortgage payment, $2,400. September 12th, 2020, Preston's business investment, failed dropshipping store, $3,500. December 10th, 2021 roof repair, $4,000. Weekly grocery average, organic specialty, $300 per week for 260 weeks. Utility bills, insurance premiums, car payments, vacations. I watched my father flip through the pages. His face went from red to a ghostly white. He was not looking at a daughter's generosity anymore. He was looking at a ledger. He was seeing the mathematical proof of his own inadequacy. He reached the final page. I knew what was at the bottom, highlighted in red. Total expenditure, 2020-2025, $180,422.50. That was the price of my silence. That was the cost of the room they had kicked me out of. My mother looked over his shoulder. She gasped, covering her mouth with her hand. Preston grabbed the papers, scanning them, probably looking for his own name, when he saw the itemized list of his failures: the gaming PC, the crypto losses, the unused gym memberships. He threw the papers back at my father. Mr. Henderson pointed to the revolving doors. The gesture was final. Get out. They stood there for a moment, frozen. The people in the lobby, clients, partners. My colleagues were watching. The humiliation was absolute. They had come to extort me, and instead, they had been handed a bill they could never pay. Slowly, defeated, my father lowered the papers. He did not look up at the ceiling. He could not bear to look for me. He turned around. My mother followed. Her shoulders slumped. Preston lingered for a second, glaring at the security guard, before storming out, kicking the glass door as he exited. I stood up from my desk and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window of my office. I looked down 20 stories to the street below. They were tiny dots on the sidewalk. I saw them arguing. I saw my father wave the papers in the air before stuffing them violently into his pocket. They looked like ants, scurrying around in a panic because someone had kicked over their anthill. I placed my hand on the cool glass. Goodbye, I said. There was no sadness. There was no guilt. The cord was cut. I turned back to my desk, sat down, and unmuted my phone. Sarah, I said, the lobby is clear. Thank you for handling that. Of course, Ms. Rosewood, she replied. Would you like me to shred the visitor logs? No, I said, opening my work file again. Keep them. I might need them for the restraining order. I went back to work. I had a deadline to meet, and unlike my family, I paid my own way. The next 12 months were a study in divergent trajectories. If I were to plot our lives on one of my data visualization charts, my line would be a steady, climbing green arrow, while the Rosewood family line would be a steep, jagged red plunge into the abyss. My life in the Iron District became a masterclass in selfish serenity. Without the anchor of a $3,000 monthly deficit dragging me down, my bank account flourished. I did not just save, I evolved. At Viridian Dynamics, my focus sharpened. Liberated from the constant domestic drama and the late-night panic attacks about paying my father's credit card bills, I led the recovery team through a high-profile ransomware attack on a national hospital network. The success was absolute. By March, I was promoted to project director. My salary increased by 40%, and I received a corner office that looked out over the skyline, a real office, with a locking door and a security clearance, not a corner of a kitchen table. I started dating a man named Julian, an architect who understood the value of silence and structure. We took weekend trips to vineyards in Napa and art galleries in Santa Fe. I bought a vintage Italian leather sofa for my loft, the kind I used to stare at in magazines but never dared to purchase because my mother would have called it frivolous. I drank good wine. I slept 8 hours a night. I was flourishing. Meanwhile, 3 miles away in the suburbs, the house I left behind was rotting from the inside out. I knew this because Mrs. Higgins, my former neighbor and the neighborhood's unofficial surveillance system, kept me updated. She thought she was just gossiping, but I was building a dossier. "It is terrible. Hadley," she told me over the phone in April. "I saw a tow truck take your father's sedan away, the nice one." It turned out that Preston had convinced my parents that the crypto market crash was just a correction. He needed capital to buy the dip. My father, desperate to believe that his son was a genius and not a leech, had taken out a title loan on his car. He gave Preston $15,000. Preston put it all into a coin called Safe Moon, or something equally ridiculous. The developer of the coin disappeared with the liquidity pool 48 hours later. The money vanished. The car followed shortly after. By June, the financial rot had eaten through their savings. My father's pension, which I had previously subsidized to cover the mortgage, was woefully insufficient to keep the house running. The reality of the economy hit them hard. Mrs. Higgins called me again in July. "I saw your mother at the grocery mart. Hadley. She was wearing a uniform. She is working the checkout lane." My mother, Linda, who had spent the last decade turning her nose up at menial labor and bragging about her garden club, was now scanning coupons and bagging frozen peas for minimum wage at 55 years old. I felt a flicker of pity, but I extinguished it immediately. She was not a victim of circumstance. She was a victim of her own enabling. She was working to feed a 25-year-old man who refused to get a job because he was too talented for the 9-to-5 grind. The physical decay of the house accelerated as autumn approached. The Crypto Command Center, my former sanctuary, had become a landfill. According to Mrs. Higgins, who had gone over to drop off a casserole, the room was knee-deep in takeout boxes, energy drink cans, and dirty laundry. Preston had stopped streaming. He spent his days sleeping and his nights raging at video games, surrounded by the filth of his own failure. The expensive LED lights were peeling off the walls. The air in that room was stagnant and heavy. Then came the winter. The furnace in the Rosewood house was 20 years old. I had kept it alive with annual maintenance contracts and timely repairs. Without me, nobody had changed the filters. Nobody had serviced the blower motor. In late November, during the first hard freeze of the year, the heat exchanger cracked. Mrs. Higgins told me the repair quote was $6,000. They did not have $6,000. They did not even have $600. For the entire month of December, while I sat in my loft with my radiant floor heating set to a comfortable 72 degrees, my family was camping in their own living room. They closed off the bedrooms to conserve heat. They slept on the sofas and on mattresses dragged onto the floor, huddled around 3 dangerous cheap space heaters that tripped the circuit breakers every hour. They began to cannibalize the house. First, the 65-inch television I had bought for Christmas 3 years ago appeared on Facebook Marketplace. Then, the dining room set. Then, my mother's jewelry. They were selling the furniture to pay the electric bill, burning the ship to keep warm. I watched all of this from a distance. I did not intervene. I did not send a check. When the temptation to help rose in my throat, I looked at the photo of my ergonomic chair sitting in the rain. I remembered the silence of my mother as she pointed to the kitchen table. I held my ground. The climax of their downfall arrived in the mailbox on a gray Tuesday in January. It was a certified letter from the bank. They had missed 6 consecutive mortgage payments. They had ignored the warning letters. They had ignored the calls. They had buried their heads in the sand, hoping that a miracle or perhaps my return would save them. But I was not there. The letter was a notice of default and intent to foreclose. Mrs. Higgins texted me a picture of the notice taped to the front door, which she had snapped while walking her dog. "Property to be auctioned," it read. I zoomed in on the image on my phone. My thumb traced the legal jargon. They had 30 days to cure the default or the house would be seized. I sat back in my chair, my beautiful, dry, warm, ergonomic chair. I took a sip of espresso. The year was up. The experiment was complete. The house of cards had fallen, and now the wind was blowing the debris away. My phone rang. It was a number I did not recognize, but the area code was familiar. It was a lawyer's office, or perhaps the bank. I did not answer. I was not ready to talk yet. I had one more move to make. They were drowning, and for the first time in a year. I was going to reach out a hand, but I wasn't going to pull them into the boat. I was going to buy the ocean. I was not physically present in the freezing living room when the Rosewood family decided to liquidate their heritage, but I might as well have been. The paper trail they left behind was so thick, so desperate, and so legally compromising that I could reconstruct every bead of sweat on my father's forehead as he signed the listing agreement. Faced with the foreclosure notice and the terrifying prospect of homelessness, my parents panic sold. They didn't hire a reputable realtor. They didn't have the time or the money to stage the house for a proper market listing. Instead, they called one of those predatory we buy houses for cash companies, the kind that staples yellow signs to telephone poles. They agreed to a fire sale price, a number so low it was insulting, but high enough to pay off the bank and leave them with a small nest egg to rent a shabby apartment. They thought they had found the exit door. They thought they could simply cash out, blame the economy, and disappear into a smaller life without ever having to face me. They were wrong. The roadblocks appeared 3 days later at the office of a title company downtown. My father, mother, and Preston sat across from a title officer, ready to sign the closing documents. They were eager. They were practically vibrating with the need to get the check. Then, the officer, a woman named Mrs. Gable, according to the report, stopped typing. She adjusted her glasses and looked at the deed. Mr. and Mrs. Rosewood, she said, confused. We cannot proceed with the closing today. Why not? My father demanded, his voice rising. We have the deed right here. It is our house. It is not entirely your house, Mrs. Gable corrected him. According to the county records, there is a cloud on the title, specifically, a 40% ownership stake held by the Hadley Rosewood Asset Protection Trust, established 5 years ago. I imagine the silence in that room was absolute. They had forgotten, or perhaps they had chosen not to understand what happened 5 years ago. Back then, my father had been sued for a minor collision involving his uninsured vehicle. To save the house from being seized as an asset in the lawsuit, I had stepped in. I used my credit to refinance the mortgage, paying off his debts and shielding the property, but I was not a fool. I did not just hand over the money. I had my lawyer draft a specific quitclaim deed that placed a significant portion of the equity into a trust under my name. It was a safety net I had built to protect them. Now, it was the steel cage that trapped them. The trust documents are quite specific, Mrs. Gable continued, likely turning the knife without realizing it. Any alienation, sale, or encumbrance of the property requires the notarized signature of the trustee, that is, Ms. Hadley Rosewood. We don't need her, Preston reportedly shouted, slamming his hand on the table. She doesn't live there. She moved out. It is Mom and Dad's house. That is not how the law works, sir, Mrs. Gable said coldly. Without her signature, this house cannot be sold. You own 60% of a house you cannot liquidate. They were sent home. The deal was dead. The cash buyer walked away. The foreclosure clock was still ticking. That night, desperation mutated into criminality. This part of the story I know because the fraud department of the bank called me directly. Back in the cold, dark house, huddled under blankets, Preston convinced my parents that there was still a way out. He told them that I would never know. He told them that signatures were just scribbles on a page. He told them that they were my parents. So technically, they had the right to sign for me a warped logic that only a narcissist could invent. They found an old birthday card I had written to them years ago. They traced my signature. They practiced it on scrap paper. My mother, Linda, the woman who taught me never to tell a lie, sat at the kitchen table and forged my name on a quitclaim deed modification form they had downloaded from the internet. Preston scanned it. They submitted it electronically to the mortgage servicer, hoping to remove my name from the title so they could sell the house behind my back. It was a clumsy, amateurish attempt. My signature is unique, but more importantly, as a data security expert, I had placed a permanent fraud alert on my credit report and all my asset titles the day I moved out. The moment that document hit the bank's server, red flags went up. The signature did not match the biometric profile on file. The notary stamp looked pixelated and fake. 24 hours later, my father received a phone call. It wasn't from a buyer, it was from the bank's legal compliance division. "Mr. Rosewood," the investigator said, "we have received a document purporting to remove a trustee from the deed. We have reason to believe this signature is a forgery. Federal wire fraud is a felony that carries a sentence of up to 20 years in prison. We are obligated to report this to the FBI unless the other party, Ms. Hadley Rosewood, confirms in person that she signed it." My father dropped the phone. They were not just homeless now. They were facing prison time. Preston, the mastermind, immediately retreated, claiming he only suggested it and that Mom was the one who held the pen. They were turning on each other, rats in a sinking bucket. They had no options left. The walls had closed in. The air in the room was gone. There was only one person who could stop the police report and save the house from the auction block. They had to call me. I was in a meeting when my phone buzzed. It was a voicemail. I usually ignored them, but the transcription preview caught my eye. "Hadley, please, it's Dad. We are in trouble. Real trouble. The bank. They mentioned the police. We tried to sell the house. We didn't know about the trust. Please, don't let them take us to jail. We are begging you." I read the words. I listened to the audio. His voice was broken. The arrogance was gone. The entitlement had been stripped away by the cold reality of the penal code. I did not call back immediately. I let them sweat for another 48 hours. I let the terror of the looming police investigation marinate. I wanted them to understand that I was not their daughter anymore. I was the judge, and they were awaiting sentencing. Finally, on a Thursday evening, I sent a single email. Subject: the house. Meet me at the offices of Sterling. Cooper Ross at 9 o'clock in the morning on Monday. Do not be late. Bring the deed. I was offering them a lifeline, but they did not know that the rope I was throwing them was actually a leash. Thanksgiving usually conjures images of crowded tables, arguments over politics, and the dry, overcooked turkey my mother insisted was traditional. But this year, Thanksgiving smelled like cedarwood, sea salt, and an $80 bottle of Cabernet. I was staying at a cliffside resort in Big Sur, watching the Pacific Ocean crash against the rocks below. The fire in my private cabin was crackling, and for the first time in 29 years, I did not have to pretend to be grateful for a life I hated. My phone, however, was not respecting the holiday truce. I had placed it on the coffee table, screen down, but it had been vibrating incessantly since the sun went down. It buzzed against the wood like an angry hornet trapped in a jar. I knew what was happening. The holiday season amplifies desperation. It is the time when the absence of family feels like a physical wound, and for the Rosewood family, that wound was currently being salted by the looming threat of prison and homelessness. I picked up the glass of wine, swirled the dark red liquid, and finally reached for the phone. I did not unlock it. I simply scrolled through the notifications on the lock screen. There were 42 missed calls, 27 voicemails. I sat back on the plush leather sofa and pressed play on the first message. The speakerphone quality was tinny, but the emotion was high definition. "Hadley," my mother's voice cracked. She sounded small. Gone was the woman who had pointed to the kitchen table with a sneer. This was the voice of a woman standing on the edge of a cliff. "Please pick up. We don't have anywhere to go. The bank sent another letter. They are talking about the police. Hadley, your father can't go to jail. He is an old man. We are sorry. God, we are so sorry." I deleted it. I pressed play on the next one. "It is all my fault." This was my father. He sounded breathless, as if he had been pacing. "I should have stopped him. I should have listened to you. I know we messed up. I know we took advantage. But you can't let this happen. You are our daughter." The next three were from Preston. For the first time in his life, he wasn't shouting, he wasn't bragging. He sounded terrified. "Hads, listen," he stammered. "I will leave. I swear. If you save the house, I will move out. I will go to a shelter. I will sleep in my car. Just don't let them lose the house. Mom is falling apart. Please." I listened to them all. A chorus of regrets. A symphony of begging. They were bargaining with a ghost. I looked out the window at the darkness of the ocean. The wine tasted slightly bitter on my tongue. I closed my eyes and tried to feel sympathy. I tried to summon the biological imperative that says, you must protect your kin. But every time I tried to feel sorry for them, a different image superimposed itself over their weeping faces. I saw my ergonomic chair. I saw it sitting on the balcony, the mesh fabric soaked through with November rain, the expensive lumbar support warping in the cold. I remembered the feeling of standing there, looking at the only object that supported my spine and my livelihood, treated like garbage because my brother needed space to play pretend. I remembered the dismissal in my mother's eyes. I remembered the silence of my father when I asked where I was supposed to work. They didn't care about me then. They only cared about me now because I was the only thing standing between them and the consequences of their own greed. They weren't missing me. They were missing the safety net I provided. I did not call them back. Thursday passed into Friday. Friday bled into Saturday. I stayed in the resort. I got a massage. I read a book by the fire. I ate room service. For 3 days, I let them sit in silence. I knew exactly what was happening in that house. Every hour the phone didn't ring. Their panic would ratchet up another notch. They would be staring at the walls, jumping at every car that passed, terrified that it was the police coming for the fraud investigation or the bank coming to change the locks. I needed them to marinate in that fear. I needed the terror to break them completely. If I swooped in too early, if I saved them out of simple kindness, they would eventually revert. They would think they got away with it. They would think that a few tears were enough to buy my forgiveness. I had to decide what to do. I wrestled with the choice. Option A was the path of the martyr. I pay the debt. I fix the fraud. I let them stay. And I go back to being the distant, resentful daughter who sends checks. But that solved nothing. They would just bleed me dry again in 5 years. Option B was the nuclear option, I do nothing. I let the foreclosure happen. I let the bank prosecute the fraud. My parents would lose the house. My father might get probation or worse, and they would end up destitute. It would be justice, pure and Old Testament. But as I watched the flames dance in the fireplace, I realized I didn't want them destroyed. I didn't want the guilt of knowing I could have stopped it but didn't. That left option C, the third way. I didn't want to be their savior, and I didn't want to be their executioner. I wanted to be their owner. I realized that the only way to coexist with the Rosewood family was to change the dynamic entirely. Democracy had failed. Love had failed. The only language they understood was power. If they wanted to live in that house, they could no longer be the masters of it. I finished my wine. I set the glass down on the coaster with a deliberate clink. It was Sunday night. The 3-day siege of silence was over. I opened my laptop. The glow of the screen illuminated my face in the dark room. I did not compose a long, emotional letter. I did not address their apologies or their tears. I treated it like a business transaction with a hostile party. I typed a single line. Subject resolution. Meet me at the offices of Sterling, Cooper, and Ross at 9 o'clock in the morning on Monday. Bring the deed and your identification. Do not be late. I hit send. I watched the progress bar swoosh across the screen. I felt a cold, hard knot of satisfaction in my chest. I wasn't going back to be their daughter. I was going back to close the deal. The conference room at Sterling, Cooper, and Ross was designed to make people feel small. It was situated on the 45th floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the city, a view that said, quite clearly, that the people inside owned the world below. In the center of the room sat a slab of mahogany long enough to land a plane on. I sat at the head of the table. I arrived 15 minutes early. I wanted to be part of the architecture when they walked in. I was wearing a bespoke charcoal suit that cost more than the car my father had lost to the title loan company. My hair was sharp, precise, and professional. Beside me sat Mr. Sterling, my attorney, a man whose silence cost $600 an hour. At exactly 9 o'clock, the heavy oak doors opened. The receptionist ushered them in. I had not seen them in flesh and blood for exactly 365 days. The change was visceral. If I looked like the future, they looked like the past, a worn-out, fading past. My father, Gerald, seemed to have shrunk 3 inches. His shoulders were caved in, and he was wearing a suit jacket that was clearly 2 sizes too big for his diminished frame. My mother, Linda, looked gray. The vibrant, judgmental woman who used to critique my outfit choices was gone, replaced by a nervous, twitchy woman clutching a knockoff handbag as if it contained her last breath. And Preston. Preston looked like a ghost. He was pale, unshaven, and his eyes darted around the room, terrified of making eye contact with the expensive art on the walls. The moment my mother saw me, her face crumpled. It was a reflex. She dropped her bag and lunged forward, arms wide open, tears already springing to her eyes. "Hadley," she wailed, aiming for a dramatic, cinematic embrace. "Oh, my baby, thank God." It was a performance. It was the mother card, the emotional trump card she had played for 29 years to get her way. I did not stand up. I did not smile. I simply raised my right hand. Palm out, fingers flat, a traffic cop stopping a car. "Stop," I said. My voice was not loud, but it stripped the air out of the room. She froze halfway to the table, her arms still raised. She looked at me, confused, waiting for the script to continue. "Sit down," I said, pointing to the 3 empty chairs at the far end of the table. "This is not a social call. This is a business meeting. Do not touch me." The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush bone. My mother slowly lowered her arms. She looked at my father, but he was staring at his shoes. She shuffled to the chair and sat down. "Mr. Sterling cleared his throat. He opened a thick leather binder in front of him. The sound of the heavy paper turning was the only noise in the room. "Mr. and Mrs. Rosewood?" Mr. Sterling began, his voice smooth and detached. "We are here to address the impending foreclosure of the property at 42 Oak Creek Lane and the matter of the fraudulent documents submitted to the bank last week." My father flinched at the word fraudulent. "We are sorry," my father whispered. "We were desperate. Hadley, we didn't mean to." "I am not interested in your intent," I interrupted. "I am interested in math." I signaled Mr. Sterling. He slid 3 copies of a document across the polished wood. They slid perfectly, stopping right in front of each family member. "As of this morning," I said, leaning back in my leather chair, "the bank is owed $14,000 in arrears. The legal fees for the foreclosure process are another $5,000. The total amount required to stop the auction and save the house is $19,000. I paused. They were staring at me, waiting. "I have a cashier's check for the full amount sitting on this table," I said. "I am prepared to pay the arrears. I am prepared to reinstate the mortgage and stop the legal proceedings regarding the forgery." The tension in the room snapped. It was palpable. Preston let out a loud, wet breath of relief. A smile broke across his face, that familiar, arrogant grin of someone who thinks he has gotten away with murder. "I knew it," Preston said, looking at our parents. "I told you. She is not going to let us go to jail. She is still our sister. Thanks. Hads, seriously, that was a close one. We can just go back to normal now. Right? I will get my streaming room set back up." I let him finish. I wanted him to build the castle in the sky so I could kick the clouds out from under it. "You seem to be confused," I said. My voice was ice water. "I am not paying the bank to save you. I am paying the bank to protect my assets. Preston's smile faltered. What? I am not giving you $19,000, I continued. I am investing in it, and like any investor, I expect a return. I nodded to Mr. Sterling. He turned the page in the binder. He slid a new set of documents across the table. These were thicker. They were bound in blue legal covers. This, I said, is a quitclaim deed. My father picked it up, his hands shaking. He adjusted his glasses. You currently own 60% of the house, I explained, breaking it down so even Preston could understand. I own 40%. However, based on the forensic accounting I provided to you in the lobby of my office 11 months ago, you owe me a personal debt of $180,422. That debt consists of the mortgage payments I made, the renovations I funded, and the cash I gave you over 5 years. I leaned forward, locking eyes with my father. We are going to settle that debt today. You are going to sign over your remaining 60% interest in the property to me. In exchange, I will forgive the $180,000 debt, and I will pay the $19,000 to save the house from foreclosure. You want the whole house? My mother gasped. But where will we live? You will live in the house, I said, but not as owners. You will live there as tenants. Tenants. My father slammed the document down. In my own house, I bought that house 30 years ago. And you lost it 30 days ago when you stopped paying the mortgage, I shot back. You have 2 choices. Gerald, choice A. You walk out of this office, the bank forecloses on Tuesday, you lose the house anyway, then the bank's fraud division presses charges for the forged signature. You go to prison, Mom goes to a shelter. Preston goes to the street. I let the image hang there. I saw the terror in my mother's eyes. Choice B, I continued. You sign the deed. The house becomes 100% mine. I pay the bank. You get to stay. But you stay on a lease. You pay rent. And there are rules. Rent? Preston scoffed. We don't have any money. That is why we are in this mess. I know, I said. That is why the rent will be subsidized. But make no mistake, it is a lease. It has a termination clause. It has inspection rights. This is blackmail, my father hissed. His face was red, but it was the impotent rage of a defeated man. You are stealing our home. I am buying it, I corrected him, and I am paying a premium. I am buying your freedom from a felony charge. That is a very expensive commodity. I looked at my watch. Mr. Sterling has another appointment at 10. You have 15 minutes to decide. Sign the papers and go home, or leave the papers and go to the police station. It makes no difference to me. I have an apartment. I have a bed. I am fine. I watched them. I watched the realization sink in. They were looking for a savior, but they found a landlord. They were looking for love, but they found a ledger. My mother looked at the document. She looked at Preston, who was slumped in his chair, realizing his streaming room was no longer his birthright. She looked at my father, who was staring at the mahogany table as if wishing it would swallow him whole. Where do we sign? My mother whispered. Linda, my father snapped. We have to. Gerald, she cried, her voice rising to a hysterical pitch. I can't live in a car, I can't go to jail. Look at us. We have nothing. She grabbed the pen from the center of the table. Her hand was trembling so hard she could barely hold it. Page 4, Mr. Sterling said helpfully, right above the line that says grantor. I sat there, perfectly still, watching my mother sign away her legacy. She pushed the paper to my father. He stared at me with pure hatred, tears streaming down his cheeks. It wasn't the hatred of a victim. It was the hatred of a tyrant who had been overthrown. He picked up the pen. He signed. And Preston, I added, you don't need to sign the deed, but you do need to read the lease agreement, specifically, the clause regarding occupancy limits. Preston looked up, confused. We will get to that in a moment, I said, signaling Mr. Sterling to collect the signed deed. First, Let's make this official. Mr. Sterling took the papers. He stamped them. The sound echoed like a gunshot. Congratulations, Ms. Rosewood, Mr. Sterling said, ignoring my weeping parents. You are now the sole owner of the property at 42 Oak Creek Lane. I nodded. I did not smile. I did not feel joy. I felt the cold, hard satisfaction of a balanced equation. Now, I said, opening the folder in front of me, let's talk about the rules of my house. Mr. Sterling pushed the secondary document toward my parents. This was not the deed transfer. This was the lease agreement. It was a standard residential lease, the kind used for high-risk tenants with poor credit history. Read Clause 14, subsection B, I said, leaning back in my chair and crossing my legs. I believe you will find the occupancy limits quite strict. My father, Gerald, squinted at the paper. His face, already flushed from the humiliation of signing over the deed, turned a deep, violent shade of purple. He slammed his hand on the mahogany table, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the quiet room. You cannot be serious, he shouted, saliva flying from his lips. This says 2 occupants. 2. It specifically lists Gerald and Linda Rosewood. Where is Preston's name? Preston's name is not on the lease, I replied calmly, because Preston is not going to live there. What? Preston yelped. He had been slouching in his chair, scrolling on his phone, assuming his safety was guaranteed. Now, he sat up straight, his eyes wide. What do you mean, I am not going to live there? It is my house, too. It was never your house, Preston, I said, my voice devoid of emotion. It was Mom and Dad's house. Now, it is my house, and I have a strict policy regarding unemployed tenants who destroy property. You are a liability. You are evicted. You are robbing us, my father roared. He stood up, knocking his chair over. You tricked us into signing the deed, and now you are kicking your brother out on the street. You are a monster. You stole my home. I looked at him. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. I simply held his gaze until he stopped panting. You stole my office first, Dad, I said softly. You threw my livelihood out into the rain because you didn't respect me. I'm just taking the whole house as interest on that loan. That is how the real world works. You borrow. You pay. I turned to my mother. She was trembling, looking back and forth between her husband, her son, and the lease agreement that stood between her and homelessness. Here is the deal, I said, laying it out with surgical precision. You have a choice. Option 1. You refuse to sign the lease. I walk away. The bank takes the house tomorrow morning. You all get evicted. And then, the fraud investigation begins. You go to prison for forgery. Preston goes to the street. I paused to let the terror of that reality sink in. Option 2, I continued. You sign the lease. You stay in the house. I pay off the arrears. But Preston leaves. Today, he packs his bags and he goes. He is 25 years old. He can get a job. He can go to a shelter. I don't care. But he does not sleep under my roof. Mom, Preston screamed, grabbing her arm. Don't listen to her. You can't do this. I am your son. My mother looked at Preston. She looked at his designer hoodie, bought with stolen money. She looked at the soft hands that had never done a day of manual labor. Then she looked at the window, where the gray sky promised a freezing night. She looked at the lease. This was the woman who had always chosen him. She had chosen him over my comfort, over my career, over my feelings. But now, she was being asked to choose him over her own survival. She picked up the pen. Linda, my father whispered, shocked. Linda, you can't. I am not going to jail. Gerald, she said, her voice shaking but firm. And I am not sleeping under a bridge. Preston needs to grow up. Mom. Preston's voice broke. It was the sound of a child realizing the safety net had just been cut. My mother didn't look at him. She couldn't. She stared fixedly at the paper and signed her name, Linda Rosewood. She slid the paper to my father. "Sign it, Gerald, or I am leaving you too." My father looked at his wife. He looked at his son. The defiance drained out of him, leaving only an old, tired man. He sat down heavily. He picked up the pen and signed. "I hate you," Preston hissed at me, tears streaming down his face. "I hope you die alone." "I might," I said, standing up and buttoning my jacket. "But I will die in a very comfortable house that I own." I nodded to Mr. Sterling. "File the papers, change the locks on the front door by noon, code the keypad for 2 users only, and send a crew to clear out the second bedroom. That room is to be stripped, sanitized, and sealed. It will be my storage archive." "Understood. Ms. Rosewood," Mr. Sterling said. I turned and walked toward the door. I did not look back. I could hear Preston sobbing, a raw, ugly sound of betrayal, mixed with my father's low murmuring. I walked out of the conference room and into the elevator. When I stepped out of the building, it was raining. It was a heavy, cold November downpour, exactly like the one that had soaked my chair 365 days ago, but this time, I did not feel it. A sleek black town car pulled up to the curb. My driver, a quiet man named Elias, stepped out and opened a large black umbrella. He shielded me instantly, ensuring not a single drop of water touched my suit. "To the office, Ms. Rosewood?" he asked. "Yes, Elias," I said, sliding into the warm leather interior. As the car pulled away, merging into the traffic, I pulled out my phone. I opened the smart home app. I had reconnected the cameras 5 minutes ago. On the screen, I saw the feed from the hallway of the Rosewood house. My parents were there. They looked defeated. They were holding black garbage bags. They were walking in and out of Preston's room, my old office. They were not moving furniture in. They were dragging trash out. I watched my father haul a gaming chair toward the front door. I watched my mother sweep up a pile of energy drink cans. They were cleaning my room. They were preparing it for my silence. I watched for a moment longer, then closed the app. They had pushed me out of a room that was barely 15 square meters. They thought they could displace me to the kitchen table. To get back in, they had to pay with an entire mansion and their own dignity. It was a steep exchange rate, I admit, but it was the fair market price for a lesson in respect. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today, so please drop a comment below and share your thoughts on whether you think my revenge was justified or if I went too far. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the Veronica Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit that hype button to help this story reach more people who need a little reminder that sometimes silence is the loudest revenge of all.